This is the Flory Super V, model V62, and what we're going to go over in this video is how to properly set this machine up, how to operate it, how to fold it up for transport, and also how to do some basic maintenance. So the first thing I need to do to set these heads up is first check my tire pressure. Make sure I've got 35 psi all the way around. Chances are if it's a new machine, it's been overinflated for shipping. So get your tire pressure set right, and then we're going to pick the heads just a little bit off the ground. So I've got the heads off the ground, grab the tool that's hanging in the back of the cab, and I'm going to make my adjustments here on the depth wheels. So we got 4 depth wheels, 2 on each head. First thing you need to do is pull the linch pin and then take this L pin out. Sometimes you might have to get it in the right position. Pull this L pin out. Make sure you do that on all 4 because we're going to need to make adjustments on both heads. Tool here, we're going to go clockwise if we're going to raise the head, and we're going to go counterclockwise if we're going to lower the head. Get back in the machine, lower the heads down, then you're going to check your depth. Okay, so what I'm looking for here is I want these wire teeth about 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch right off the dirt. So it's going to be tough to see it in here, but we've got 5 time bars with a set of wire teeth and rubber fingers behind them. You're going to try and get in here and actually rotate till we get to our lowest point here and check your depth. Usually I just kind of use my fingers, and I'm looking for a finger width between the wire teeth and the ground. So once we get our depth set right, then we're going to move on to the brushes here. Okay, these brushes, if they are not set right, will create a lot of dust. So take the time to get these set right. As you can see, these brushes have a cone shape to them. I don't want to lose that cone shape. I want to keep these just like this. I don't want to flatten out these cones. So we've got a few different adjustments on this brush that we can make. We've got this bolt right here, which will change the pitch. As you can see, I've got this brush nose down just a bit. We've got this adjustment here that's going to change the overall height of our brush. And then we've got bolts here that we can change the side-to-side angle if we're going to be on a berm or not. So take the time, make these adjustments. We want this brush just barely touching the ground. We don't need this thing digging in the ground and making a bunch of dust. It will move the nuts just fine, just on top of the dirt like this. If you've got a 34 series, your brush is going to look just like this. The only difference is this hydraulic ram that we have right here that we control from the cab on the V-sweep. This will be a manual adjustment for you on the 34 series, similar to this top link. On the back side of this head is the flow control for the brush. Set that flow control around 3 or 4, and that will be plenty fast. Usually I see these brushes oversped, creating more dust than they need to. And what happens is when we create more dust than we need to, that dust funnels right here in front of the machine, and it goes right into the view of the operator. It makes operating this machine very difficult, especially if the air is not moving that day. So take the time, get this brush set right. It does not need to be in the dirt, and it does not need to be spinning really fast. Now, one other setting that I do want to point out is what we have on this side. This would be what I would call travel mode or non-operation mode. So you have the ability to take this brush and pin it in this hole. Normally what you're going to want when we're operating, we want it pinned in this slot right here to allow for some float. But if we're not going to use this brush, instead of taking the brush off, we can pin it in this hole, tighten this top link all the way up, set our brush like this so we're a few inches off the ground, and we can go ahead and operate, turn the flow control to 0. We can go and operate in a field where maybe it's too tight for a brush, or maybe we've got some drip hoses that aren't staked down and we don't want to wrap them up in the brushes. So you have the option here to set this brush in non-operation mode. But I'd like to get back over here one more time and just check this out. When your brushes or when your machine gets delivered to you, chances are this will be pinned in this hole right here. Okay, so make sure that we take it out and we put it in this slot, and that's going to allow this brush to have some float as we go over some uneven terrain or maybe go up against a berm. So it's going to soften it up. Also, one other thing I'd like to point out is we have plastic bolts right here on this ram. These plastic bolts are meant to be a weak point for the entire brush. So if we're going to hit something, we want this plastic bolt to break, and that way we're not damaging the rest of this arm. So it's a good idea to give your operator some extra plastic bolts in the cab, so if and when he does hit something with this brush, he's not replacing it with a grade 8 bolt. And then what happens is everything else is going to get smashed up when you do hit something again. So make sure we're replacing plastic bolts with more plastic bolts. That way we can have our weak spot there, and we'll have a lot less damage to these brushes when we're in the orchard. So that's how we set up the brushes. Now let's move on to the spouts. So these blowers are controlled with foot switches inside the cab. We can turn off the left and right blowers individually with the foot switches, and the speeds are also controlled from inside the cab with some rocker switches, and I'll show you that later. So these spouts right here, we can adjust them. We've got a lot of adjustment here. The rear spout is adjusted from inside the cab. So the up and down, the height of this rear spout, we're going to adjust that from inside the cab. And then this front spout, similar to the 34 series sweeper, it's hanging on a chain here, and it's along for the ride. So I can loosen up this wing nut and adjust my chain depth here and put my front spout where I want it. So first thing I do, get the rear spout set first, the height, and then I'm going to set the height of the front spout. And then what I'm looking for here is we're looking for this front spout and this rear spout to be working together. So what I have is I've got air coming out this bottom boot here, starting the initial push of the nuts. And then the top section of this front spout is going to help where that leaves off, continue that push. And then if my rear spout is working together with my front spout, that air will take off where that front spout leaves off. And essentially what we should get is the front spout doing the work, getting the nuts up the berm, and this rear spout taking care of the top of the berm and the back side of the berm if we get them set right. We also have adjustments here with these front extensions. We can loosen up these wing nuts here, and we can V out these front extensions. And what we're trying to do with that is clean the back side of the tree. Let's take a look at this tree right here, okay? And I'm going to be sweeping in this direction, and I'm going to be blowing that way. So if my front spout is V'd out in this direction and my rear spout is V'd out in this direction, as I approach this tree, my airflow is going to come through in this direction here and clean off this side of the tree. And then as I pass this tree, my rear spout is going to hit it at a back angle here, and hopefully what we're trying to do is clean the back side of this tree, so when we come around the other side to sweep, we don't have to worry about getting these nuts here next to the tree. So in some situations you can get away with that. If you got a heavy crop or if you got some steep berms, you're probably not going to be able to do that. You're going to need maximum airflow perpendicular to the machine just to get them over some drip lines or over a steep berm. But play with it, see what you can get away with, and it will really make a big difference on how fast you can sweep, and it's going to make a big difference on that return pass. Take the time, get these adjusted right. You're really going to speed up your sweeping process if you can get your blowers cleaning the berm the right way. All right, so let's go over the controls inside the V-sweep. The first time you look at this, it can be pretty intimidating, but once we kind of go through this and explain what each function does, it actually is pretty simple. So let's get into it. We've got parking brake up here. We've got an auxiliary switch if you add any options, maybe a sprayer or something, but typically you're not going to be using that. We've got our AC controls over here on these rockers. We've got our hazards. We've got our light. We've got our headlights for when we're traveling down the road, and we've also got our field lights if we're running in dark conditions. This is for four-wheel drive. We've got two rockers here for your blower speed, so your left and right blowers. The speeds can be changed independently, and those speeds will show up here on the display screen where it says 100% left blower, 100% right blower. Those speeds will change. You'll see them change as you mess with the speed for the blowers. These 16 buttons is what scares most people off, but these buttons are not used while we're actually sweeping. It's really for setup. So this top row of buttons is for your brushes, your left and right brushes, in and out. So once we're going to set those depending on the tree spacing that we have, and once that's set, typically we're not going to be touching those. Right here where it says left head and right head with the left and right arrows, that is the top cylinder. We call it the fold cylinder for the heads. That is strictly for folding and unfolding these heads from transport mode to field mode. So once those heads are down on the ground or folded up, you're not going to be touching this row of buttons. Down here is all the functions for the blower. So we've got the spouts up and down, left spout, right spout, up and down. And then we've got the blower slide in and out. Left blower in and out, right blower in and out. So again, we're setting our spout height based on the conditions in the field. And then we're setting our blower based on the spacing that we have as far as in and out on the blower. So once all that is set, these 16 buttons essentially are going to be left alone. We've got our throttle control down here. We're going to be operating at full throttle all the time with this machine, so 2200 RPM should be up all the way. And then we've got everything here on the joystick that we're going to need during operation. So we've got a nice decal up here to kind of remind you what it is. But we got blowers up and down, so one button will control both blowers up and down. When I hold down on this button, the blowers will raise. As soon as I let go, they're going to stop. And they won't fall. They'll just stop right there wherever you leave it. Now when I hit this down button for the blowers, those blowers will have a nice gentle fall. So it's a one-touch button, and those things will lower at a slow rate. The middle button right here is turning the heads on and off. Both heads are turned on and off just with one button. This button, there's nothing used here, so that's for future use if there's ever any options, as well as the trigger underneath the joystick. Those two buttons are not used in the standard configuration. And then right here, the two right buttons are for the heads up and down. Same thing as the blower. These heads are controlled with one button, so both heads will raise and lower with the touch of one button. And it operates the same way. When I hold down on the button, those heads will raise, and as soon as I let go, they will stop where they're at. And when I hit this button, the down button, once, they will gently fall to the ground where they'll rest, and they'll be in float mode. So it's important to know when I hit this button that those heads are now in float mode, and I don't want to hit another, I don't want to tap the up button, because then that will lock that cylinder in place. So I tap that, the heads fall down, and now they're in float position, and they can move with the terrain. Okay, so that's the controls. Everything you're going to need is going to be right here on the joystick. All this other stuff, that's really pretty much going to be preset before you start the day. Let's go over the display screen. So what we have here is our restriction indicator for the air filter. We've got coolant temp for the engine. We've got fuel level, and we've got def level, which will stay there whichever screen that we're on. Also got ground speed right here and our engine RPMs. And then these three squares right here, we've got our blower speed, left and right, and we've got our head speed. Now if we toggle over to the second display screen, really the only thing that changes is we've got a battery voltage here, we've got our oil pressure right here. This will display engine load and gallons per hour as far as the fuel rate goes. And don't be alarmed when you see 90%, 95% on that engine load. These engines are designed to run almost maxed out, and they're actually going to run the best the higher we can get to full load. Next screen is going to be just the display parameters. So we can control our reel speed from this screen. We're going to highlight it and then choose the left or right arrows. And I like to start about 55%. We really don't need any more than 60% in most cases. So somewhere between 50 and 60% is usually fast enough. We can change our units, we can change our language from this screen as well. And we jump to the next screen here with all of our hour meters. So all of these meters here are filters, our blowers, all that can be reset to 0, everything except, of course, the engine hours. So you just got to highlight the one that we want to reset and then hold down on the O button, and that will reset back to 0. All right, these two screens right here, the sprocket with the number 1 on it, that will highlight yellow whenever there's an active fault. So you might be on another display screen, and that little square will highlight yellow. Click on it, and it'll show you a set of numbers right here. It'll show you the fault codes. Those fault codes are located in the back of your operator's manual. So get familiar with those. Sometimes it can be really simple. Simple fix, like adding more coolant. And it'll also give you the severity of how severe it is. It'll tell you keep running, repair at your convenience, or it might even say shut down immediately. So get familiar with those codes. It's really good practice for the operator to take a picture with his phone and then send it to the foreman, send it to the technician that you're working with. That way they've got all the information they need. So this first screen will be the engine active faults, and the second screen will be the machine active faults. And it's important to distinguish between the two. If we got an engine fault, we're going to be needing the Caterpillar technician to come out here and work on this engine. If it is a machine fault, then it will be your Flory rep. So either your Flory dealer, or if you work directly with Flory, Flory itself will come out. These other two buttons here, that's just high and low gear, so field and road operation. And then right here is our manual purge button. So we have an automatic timer on this machine that will automatically reverse that fan and keep the back end of it clean. In cases where maybe there's a lot of leaves, you can use this once in a while, but don't get carried away with it, because oftentimes you'll actually cause the engine to get hotter than it normally would if you're using it too frequently. Okay, so now let's talk about how to transport this machine, put it on a trailer safely. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this visor and I'm going to flip it up on the cab. That's going to make space for my blowers behind the cab when I fold them out. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to slide these blowers all the way out. The machine is designed to where it will not allow me to lift these blowers all the way up unless these are all the way out. There's a limit switch here on the end of the stroke that tells the computer these blowers are all the way out, I can go all the way up. Otherwise, if we're not all the way out, it allows us to pick it up about 6 degrees, and that way if we're making our turns at the end of the row, we can still do that without having to slide the blowers all the way out or change our position. But if we're going to go all the way up for transport, these have to be all the way out. And then we're going to pick the heads up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to activate these bottom cylinders here and pick the heads up, and it's going to look kind of like this. And then I'm going to activate these top cylinders here, and we're going to fold it back on itself. And then we're going to chalk everything up. We're going to block these cylinders. We're going to pin these blowers. We're going to tie these blowers together, and it'll be ready for a trailer. So I've got everything folded up. Now it's time to get this thing in place so we can secure it down for putting it on a trailer. So inside the cab, you're going to find these cylinder blocks here, okay? These things are removed for shipping, but if you're in field mode, you're going to go ahead and place these on the lift cylinders for the blowers. So what this does is by removing these, it allows the blowers to come over center and be a little bit more secure when they're up in transportation mode. You're also going to find a tie strap. This tie strap is for the purpose of tying these two blowers together. Again, another extra measure of safety for these blowers so they don't fall down on us during transport. So you can tie the blowers together and there's no way for them to go anywhere. And one last thing for those blowers is these pins. So these pins are meant to go right in here to keep those blowers from sliding down during transport. So with pin in place, our tie strap in place, our blocks removed, these blowers are in a secure spot for transportation. Now on the heads, so we've got these cylinder blocks located underneath the bottom side of the heads, painted yellow so you can see them easily. So remove those, and we're going to place them right here on this lift cylinder. Cinch that down, do the left and right side, and these heads are ready to go. So that's the process of getting this thing on a trailer. And now what we're going to go over is how to unfold this thing the right way. So it's going to be in the reverse order, but there's just a couple things that I want to point out while we're getting this thing in field mode. So again, we're going to remove that block here. We're going to remove our pins here. If we got them tied together, we'll remove that. But the thing that I want to go over is actually the sequence of lowering these heads. So what we want to make sure is when we lower these heads that we're going to take those top cylinders, what we call the fold cylinders, and actually bring these heads out in front of the machine first before we lower them down to the ground. If we do the other order, there's a good chance that this depth wheel could get into here and damage some things. So I'll show you that order. So I got the heads down. If I had pinned these brushes in these holes, I'm going to make sure and get those back into those slots. I'm going to remove the pin here on this blower slide. Put that in the cab. And then I'm going to get my cylinder block here. I'm going to put this on the cylinder. And then we're ready to sweep. All right, so let's get into the maintenance of this machine. So starting with the grease schedule. Up here on the head, we've got grease points for each depth wheel. We've got 4 of them, and those are going to be hit at least once a week, depending on your conditions, maybe twice a week, but try not to over-grease those if you can. A good practice is once you pump some grease in here, wipe some excess grease and wipe it right here on that top surface, and it really helps keep dirt from getting into the threads. Another weekly grease point is going to be these ball swivels right here. So we've got 2 on each head, left and right. So we got a grease point here and then a grease point back here for those ball swivels. So those are typically going to be once a week. Then over here, the inner and outer bearing on the slew bearing needs to be greased every 100 hours. On the blowers, our blower bearings, we've got to have the one in the front and one in the back. We're going to grease those once every 2 weeks. And then on the very back of the machine, at our rear axle pivot point, we've got 2 grease points that we're going to need to get down here and grease on a daily basis. All right, so on the fuel system on this machine, we've got a primary fuel filter with a water bowl. We've got the secondary fuel filter, and down below here we've got an inline fuel filter. So after the first 50 to 100 hours of a new machine, you're going to replace all 3 of those filters at the same time, and then it's going to be every 500 hours after that, typically once a season. The crankcase breather filter right here, we're going to replace that every 1,000 hours, and we want to make sure we're in a very clean environment when we open up this lid and change this filter out. The engine oil on this engine, it does not come with break-in oil, so your intervals are going to start at 250 hours. So every 250 hours, we're replacing the oil filter and the engine oil itself. We've got an easy spigot right here on the side of the machine on the inside of this tank here, where you can drain the engine oil out. And yeah, every 250 hours, your engine manual is probably going to say 500 hours, but because of the harsh environment these machines run in, we recommend every 250. Now the cooling package here on the back side of the machine, like I said before, we've got a reversing fan that keeps this back grill clean, but we've also got some easy access here to get in here and clean out this radiator, and we should be cleaning this out on a daily basis. So we've got our fuel cooler, our AC condenser, and behind those we've got our charge air, we've got a radiator, and we've got our oil cooler. So keep all this clean, free of dirt and debris. Gonna have to blow it out. Yes, the reversing fan does a good job of keeping this free of leaves, but really it's not gonna keep this radiator clean of dirt. So we need to get in here on a daily basis, clean this out, clean the condenser and the fuel cooler out, and we need to make sure that the bulb seal around here stays in good shape, and that'll help keep any kind of leaves and dirt and debris out of the cooling package. So the DEF system on this machine is real critical. Anytime that we're going to come in here and fill our tank with DEF, we need to make sure that we clean this area all around here really, really well before we open up this cap. Can't let any dirt get inside the DEF tank. So our DEF tank is right here. Our DEF pump is right here on this side of the tank. And I point this out because there's a DEF filter inside of the DEF pump. And every 500 hours, you're going to be replacing this filter. So pretty much once a season, get in there and replace that filter. The battery located right here on the front side of the tank. And our master disconnect switch is right here. And I want to point out this light right here that says wait to disconnect light. When we shut off this engine, you're going to hear some high-pitched noise coming from this pump, and this light will still be on. What's happening is this pump is purging all of the DEF that was in the lines back to the tank, and we want to make sure and give it its time to do that. So make sure if you are using this disconnect switch for whatever reason, maybe for storage or for safety purposes, padlocking it right here, make sure we do not turn it off until we see that light turn off. Now, one other thing I want to point out about the electrical system, right on the other side of this grate right here, we have 3 high amp fuses, and I just want to point those out in case you run into any kind of electrical power issues. Usually the first instinct is to check the fuses, which are inside the cab. I'll show you where those are at, but don't forget about these high amp fuses right here. Check those, that might be the source of the problem. The V62 has an improved air filter system from previous models. So let's take a look at it. So the air filter is located right here, and what you need to know about this air filter is we need to be in here as little as possible. So on our display screen, we're going to let that dictate when we get in here and change this air filter out. At 75% on that display screen, we're going to start to get an icon that will flash at us and just kind of let us know we're getting close to the end. When it gets to 100%, we'll get that flash, we'll get a little bit more rapid, and we'll also get an audible beep. So let that display screen, somewhere between 75 and 100%, let that display screen tell us when we're actually getting in here. Now inside here, we've got blue Donaldson air filters. And I highly suggest that you stick with the blue. Now it does have to be a Donaldson air filter. You cannot use any other brand with this or you will avoid the warranty. These blue filters are a little bit more expensive than the white ones, but they hold a lot more dirt. So because we're trying to be in here as little as possible, because these Tier 4 final engines can handle very little, any kind of dirt intake, to protect these engines, we want to be in here as little as possible. So why not use the one that's going to hold more dirt and allow us to be in here less? So every 3 of these that I replace, I'm going to be replacing this inner filter right here, okay? Make sure that filter is nice and seated when you put it back in. And make sure all 3 clips secured in place. We've got the part number right here for the filters to use. Another part of the air filter system that has really made a big improvement is this pre-cleaner box right here. And I want to point out to you how it's working, and that way if you do have any kind of issues with the air filter life, you're not getting as much life as you think you should, chances are the problem is going to be right here, and it's going to be an easy fix. So we've got some spinner tubes right here in the face of this pre-cleaner box. So this is where the air intake is at right here. These tubes are spinning the air and separating the dirt from the air, and they're collecting inside this box. So inside this box, the dirt is getting collected, and then we've got a vacuum right here pulling the dirt and cleaning it. And that vacuum is getting pulled by our exhaust. So this box is collecting the dirt. That dirt is getting vacuumed out through our exhaust system, and essentially you've got pretty clean air going into your filter, and that really helps the life of that air filter. And you did hear me use the word replace the air filter, not clean the air filter. The air filter has to be replaced. If you're cleaning it, blowing it out, again, you're going to be voiding the warranty on these machines. So replace those filters and take care of these engines and protect them for the future. Okay, on the hydraulic system, we got our tank right here. That sight gauge for that tank is actually right inside here. We want these tanks about 3/4 full. We need some air at the top to allow these tanks to breathe. So to see where your level's at, it's going to be right inside here where the air filter is. We've got a bank of pressure test ports right here with the proper pressure for each one, so you can easily get in here and troubleshoot any kind of hydraulic issues. The filters are all going to be located on the back wall of this tank right down here. So we've got our suction filter down here and our return filters down here. The first 50 hours of a new machine, we're going to be replacing these filters, and then every 500 hours replace the filters and the oil as well. Now, on the tires and wheels, we spoke about this before. We want 35 psi on the front and rear tires. On the rear hubs right here, the oil in here, we're going to replace that oil after the first 50 hours. And then every 500, well actually once a season, we're going to be replacing the oil in here. And we want that oil about half full. So this drain plug right here, we're going to want it at either 9 o'clock or 3 o'clock position when we're going to fill it. That way we know that we have that half full. If we ever need to tow this machine, take this cap right here, remove these 2 bolts, flip that cap around, reinstall it, and that will disengage the hubs. Obviously we need to do this on the left and right side, and that will disengage the hubs, allow us to tow it out of the field or in a tough spot. It's not meant for towing down the road. It's not meant for towing at high speeds. Keep it under 10 miles an hour and not for a long distance. The hubs on your front tires right here will need to be packed with grease once a year. Okay, the maintenance on these heads is typically going to be seasonal, but some things to watch out for is tree rope here on the tine bar bearings. You need to make sure we're constantly keeping an eye on these bearings. At the beginning of the day, end of the day, break time, get in here, make sure we don't have tree rope wrapped around these bearings. That will definitely shorten the life of those bearings. Something else that's going to shorten the life of these bearings is if we let these wire teeth get too short. They'll start at 3 inches long, and when they get about 2 1/4 inches long, that's about the time we need to replace them. Now, if you're taking the time to set your heads right, you should be able to get a season out of them. But we know that conditions aren't always perfect, and so if you're going through more than one set of wire teeth in a season, keep your eye on them. Don't let them get too short. What happens is when they do get too short, we lose that flexibility in those wire teeth, and then that adds stress to these time bar bearings, and that will shorten the life of those bearings. And one way to find out if you have a bearing that went out is you'll be able to hear it from inside the cab. You'll hear that a knock, repetitive knock as those reels are going around. You knock, 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 knock. So when you hear that, you really need to stop operation and find that, that bad bearing. And how you're going to do that is you're going to pick these heads up. You're going to grab the middle of that time bar at the riser, either clamp on it with a crescent wrench or just use your hands and go through each time bar and try and find which one has any kind of play in it. The one that has some play in it, one side is going to have a loose bolt and bearing there. Replace that bearing right away before we wallow out the hole on the tab on the time bar. So keep a close eye on all of that. There's also a hub here on the end spindle. Of course, we got one on the left, one on the right. That hub will get packed with grease once a season. And the brushes, those will be replaced probably periodically throughout the season. Those will have a tendency to wear out, so that is a wear item. Make sure we're replacing those brushes when they're no longer effective. The last thing that's going to need some periodic maintenance on these machines is the AC system. So the air conditioner sits inside the cab right on the other side of this wall, and it's got a little filter on it that you can easily access from inside the cab. But the drain plugs I want to point out are on this side of the machine. They're right down here. And we just need to keep an eye on those drain plugs and make sure that we see water actually dripping through both of them. If we don't, chances are they're plugged up with mud, and we need to get in there with maybe just a toothpick or something and keep those holes free and clear. What happens is if those get plugged up, the AC system will fill up with water because it can't drain out, and that water will end up spilling into the cab and making a mess. So keep an eye on those drain plugs from time to time. Make sure you're seeing it drain properly. You should be seeing anytime you park and the machine's on, you should see little drips coming from those. So some final tips on operating this machine that I want to go over is, first, take the time to set the heads right. Take the time to set the brushes right. The less dirt we can put in the windrows, the less wear and tear we're going to have on this machine. And of course, the harvester and the elevator and everything else down the line is going to be better off. The brushes, like we talked about, can create a lot of dust, so take the time to get those right so the operator's got the best visibility he can have. The spouts, take the time to get those right. The speed at which we can sweep is dictated by how well we can clean the borders and the berms. So if we can take the time at the beginning of the day, get those spouts set just right, we'll speed up our sweeping operation as well. And then lastly, this machine is big, it can be intimidating, but once we get our width set to where we feel comfortable with, a good tip while operating is if we're sweeping a traditional planting like a nonpareil and a pollinator, your focus should be on the side on the tree that's getting harvested. So then it becomes like you're operating a normal sweeper. So if I'm sweeping and the tree that got harvested is on my right side, well then my focus is going to be right here, and I know that my width setting is going to miss the trees here on my left, so I can put most of my focus here on one side instead of trying to bounce from left to right side, and that can really wear you out throughout the day. Thanks for watching this video on the V62. I want to point out that everything that we just went over, it can be found in your operator's manual. So all the fault codes that you're going to see on that display screen, you're going to find in the back of the book here. All the filters, all the maintenance intervals, all of the warning icons that might show up on the display screen, they're all going to show up right here. So get familiar with this book, keep it in the cab with you so you can reference to it throughout the life of this machine.